Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, every single one of us, every member of the United States Senate, my fellow Vermonters, all Americans, people around the world are absolutely thrilled by the ceasefire in Gaza. After 2 years of relentless bombing, after 2 years of horror for the hostages and their families, the bombing has largely stopped and the hostages are home. This is extraordinary. And I salute everyone involved in getting us to this day, including President Trump. But let's be clear. There is more work to be done. The only way this ceasefire will succeed is if it is the beginning of a relentless, tireless process that aims to get us to the two-state solution, 2 states for 2 peoples, a safe and democratic Jewish state of Israel, alongside a sovereign state for the Palestinians that are indigenous to the land where they now live, as envisioned in the President's 20-point plan and has been U.S. policy for over 50 years. So the question before us is, will all who are involved, particularly the United States government, Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Palestinian Authority, U.S. partners in the Gulf and our European allies, will everyone do every single thing possible to make that success of a lasting peace through a 2-state solution a likelihood? And let me be candid, Mr. President. I am extremely alarmed at what we're already seeing since the ceasefire. On the Israeli side, Mr. Netanyahu is continuing to dial up or down the delivery of urgently needed food or medicine, depending on what his political desires of the moment are. And after 2 years of already having kept food out, largely, for starving kids, that has to be provided with the 600 trucks a day, unabated, continuously and regularly. And at the same time, Hamas is score settling, is committing public executions and intimidating the Palestinians who yearn for peace and a return to some degree of normalcy. The impediments to peace are deep and they are clear. So we need to ask ourselves, what do we need to do to make sure that the violence and the destruction does not resume? In Gaza, one thing is absolutely essential. Mr. Netanyahu must stop blocking the medicine and the food for starving kids and Palestinians. We cannot condone the Israeli military under the instructions of the Netanyahu government from illegally blocking international food aid from getting through Rafah. And yet we see a continuation of children facing severe malnutrition and hunger. We also see kids who are sick and had the promise of getting health care, cancer treatment, women who need maternity facilities, or basic medicines and treatments still not having access to them. The Netanyahu government cannot be allowed to once again turn on and off the supply of food and medicine and use it as a military tool. Withholding fruit and vegetables and other food from 1 million hungry kids is not a military response. It's a collective punishment. Next, Mr. Netanyahu must finally, once and for all, stop the bombing in Gaza. The IDF's own data shows that more than 5 out of 6 people killed by IDF bombs supplied by the U.S. over the past 2 years were civilian casualties. And those government bombings that have been renewed in Gaza this week, killing nearly 100 and injuring even more after 2 soldiers were killed in Rafah, has got to stop. These types of response bombings that were so frequent before the ceasefire, disproportionate, and illegal by and large are no more legal and as disproportionate when they're occurring after the ceasefire and jeopardize the stability and survivability of the ceasefire. So we should be calling on the Netanyahu government to reopen the medical evacuation corridor so that those Palestinian kids in Gaza with traumatic war wounds, bullets in their bodies and missing limbs can be evacuated to Palestinian church hospitals in Jerusalem. And the violence and settler attacks in the West Bank also represent an ominous threat to the ceasefire and a threat to fulfilling a true vision of peace. Gaza and the West Bank are part of what will be a separate Palestinian state. And that violence that it's occurring at the hands of settlers has to be stopped by the Netanyahu government. And Mr. President, just this week in the West Bank, we saw violent attacks by masked, club-wielding settlers on Palestinian villages and harvesters. They even attacked the very same village that our ambassador, Mike Huckabee, had visited and promised to protect only a few months before. This photograph, taken only a few days ago, is the result of an illegal Israeli settler beating a 55-year-old woman who is harvesting olives on her family's ancestral lands, beating her with that club without mercy, without restraint. Her name is Ufa Abu Aliua. She's a mother and she's a victim of violence. And this just happened days ago. By the way, October marks the start of the olive harvest season across the West Bank. And since the start of the harvest, where folks have to go from their homes to the fields, illegal Israeli settlers have reportedly staged 158 assaults against Palestinian farmers, and they've destroyed nearly 800 trees. And these trees, as you know, are nurtured over generations, just like the ones on the Mount of Olives. And many Palestinian families depend on them as their only source of income. The violence, by the way, also impacts Americans. And if Mr. Netanyahu is serious about working with the president and supporting the ceasefire that he did agree to, he'll take action to hold accountable those responsible for the Americans killed by Israeli forces and illegal settlers. Americans like Saif Musalat, a Florida teenager who was on vacation visiting family when he was attacked and he was killed by illegal settlers. And Mr. Netanyahu must also finally help the United States investigate the killing of the American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, who was shot by an Israeli sniper from a couple of hundred yards away, nowhere near any Israeli troops. A Palestinian state envisioned by the ceasefire requires that Mr. Netanyahu also end the constant expansion of settlements into the West Bank. The Israeli government must stop demolishing Palestinian homes, sometimes using bulldozers paid for by American taxpayers. And yet, the Netanyahu government is going full steam ahead. This is an immense impediment to peace. And to be certain, Hamas, too, must lay down its arms. It must refrain from violence. That is an incredible threat to the ceasefire. Ultimately, Hamas has got to go. Hamas violence is that threat to peace. It's a threat to the Palestinians living in Gaza who yearn for peace and yearn for an opportunity to rebuild where they live and have their kids be back in school and to be safe. The ceasefire acknowledges that there must be a force that has sufficient authority to quell Hamas violence. This is the peacekeeping force that was in the 20-point presidential plan. if we're going to be successful, we have to redouble our efforts to stand that force up and make certain that all the signatories to that peace plan do their part to make certain that that can happen. President Trump's leadership to help achieve a ceasefire, that leadership must be redoubled to achieve a durable peace and a lasting peace for the Israelis and the Palestinians. To have this stop on the day the agreement was signed, without then redoubling efforts to face the difficult challenges that await resolution after the ceasefire, will result in failure. So I call on the President, I urge all of us to do every single thing we can to stay focused on the implementation of the peace plan and not turn away as though this is yesterday's problem. Because if we don't do that, it will be tomorrow's problem once again. Mr. President, I urge all of us to accept the burden of leadership that is absolutely required for the well-being of the entire region, but for the promise of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state, and for the promise of the Palestinian people living alongside in peace with Israeli neighbors. Mr. President, I yield back.